Welcome, everyone. I think we'll start off here. We're just a little bit past 3 o'clock Eastern Time. Very excited that all of you have joined us in building on three pretty exceptional days at GSV, really focusing on knowledge sharing, innovation, and collaboration. And we're really focused on this panel to looking at impact investing and how to be transformative and really a call to action to be action-oriented. I'm Rusty Greif. I'm your moderator for the next 59 minutes. Excited for this conversation. We have an amazing panel. Just brief background. I am an EdTech co-founder of two Silicon Valley education companies, Grocket and Learnist. I'm also a founding managing director of the 1776 Global Impact Fund, focused mostly on investing in education, future of work companies over the last 5+ years. And also I am now CEO of my own group called the EQ Group, which focuses on advising and building out digital learning and future of work products, platforms, and partnerships. Most proud of the fact that I'm a senior advisor to JFF and work really closely with the amazing team there. We have four outstanding impact investors and entrepreneurs on this panel. Want to thank all of them. They've been wonderful to work with the last couple of days in putting together what we hope will be informative, but also really interactive time together. What we're focusing on is looking at, yes, an impact investing in a crisis, but looking at also the challenges, as well as the opportunities and innovations that we could realize, especially related to a post-COVID world. We're dealing obviously with a health pandemic, historic unemployment and underemployment, especially for vulnerable populations. We're really facing structural and systemic racial injustices that are impacting our everyday life and the American experience. And the four people today have very relevant, extraordinary experiences around this. And so we want to give them the opportunity for us to engage in that conversation. Quick format rules. We all as a group got together and wanted to make this as kind of fun and interactive as possible. I'll do my best to keep the dialogue moving. We encourage questions from the group. We have a moderator as well that's kind of keeping track of some questions, but the group here is going to kind of move in and out. So hopefully it will be really dynamic and fun, and maybe even a little bit of mess and chaos along the way, which makes it actually fun. We have and they'll introduce more as they talk throughout the session, Kristina Francis, who is the partner at the Marathon Fund, and wave her hand. I'm looking at this. Carrie Shaw, CEO of Embodied Labs, a pioneering healthcare immersive technology company. Jesse Haselton, one of the leaders and directors at ECMC Foundation. And Yigal Kurzembaum, founding managing director of ETF, Education Technology Fund, which is housed in JFF and has a really interesting background in impact investing. So very brief context here, just to set the framework up, and then we'll let really the panel go, and I'm going to kick it off with Yigal. Very recently, Global Impact Investing Network came out with their annual Impact Investor Survey. Literally, this came out only a couple of months ago. And just a couple of data points that I think could be helpful for us. They estimate now that impact investing globally is roughly around $720 billion. Sizable amount of money. But actually, interesting enough, in that same survey, we actually looked at impact dedicated funds account for less than 1% of global investment. So it's really relevant from a contextual standpoint of actually how small that is driven around impact-focused funds. That same survey looked at the top 3 reasons for making impact investments. Not shockingly so, but there's some data that's interesting here. 87% consider both impact being central and very important, the critical important motivation for the top impact funds. Around 80% also look at impact investing as one of the most efficient ways of achieving impact goals, which I think is interesting because we're going to talk today about efficiency and around metrics around impact investing and different perspectives on that. And then finally, a data point that I thought was neat from the survey is around 70% of those investors as part of the impact investor group from the survey see impact investing as one of the most attractive forms of actual looking at financial returns, which is another interesting thing that Yigal will talk a little bit about, kind of the state of impact investing and the obvious relationship in defining metrics of impact as well as financial returns. I don't want us to get lost in data today. We all kind of made that commitment to each other. I think it provides good context. But really what we're trying to drive with each other is looking at issues and innovations, opportunities around new impact models. And Jesse and others have some really interesting input around how that is changing because of COVID. Final thing I'll leave you with, and then really turn it to Yigal. I thought about this group and the work that we've been doing the last week or so in preparing for this. And I was actually very inspired by a video I watched over a week ago. It was Reverend William Barber. He was giving a speech at the Poor People's Campaign rally that was in June. And he said something that candidly has kind of haunted me for the last week or so, but I think it's relevant to our conversation. And what he declared is, we are born at the right time. And he was referring to, obviously, the crises that we're in right now. And so the direct quote is, we are born at the right time. We are rising together at the right time. This is our call to action. And I think you have four people that are living and breathing on a daily basis their call to action. And those are the things that we want to talk about, which I think is frankly very aligned with how GSV has focused a lot of the conversation over the last 3 days. So Yigal, kick us off, if you will. I'd love to get your perspective on more of the larger market dynamics of impact investing, maybe like a starting point, and how impact investing has grown over the last 10 years, because it's become something with a new level of energy. And you have some unique perspectives on that because of your past experiences.
Sure. Thank you, Rusty, and pleasure to be here with everybody. Thank you for joining us on the third day of the conference. We're going to make this exciting and conversational. Impact investing as a term was coined in 2007 at the Rockefeller Foundation. I jumped in and joined the impact investing bandwagon, if you will, in 2009. Much like other folks that were early on, my gateway drug, so to speak, was microfinance, and that's how I got my start. And so I'm just going to give a little context in like where we were in 2009 and where we are now, and just so you can see kind of the rapid growth in impact investing, because really in 2009 we were, scratching the surface and building a new ecosystem and a new asset class, and there was a lot of uncertainty around that. But here's just some data points. I mean, in 2009, there was roughly $1 to $2 billion, I would say, in invested impact investments, right? Excluding development finance institutions. As Rusty pointed out, we're at 720 billion. In 2009, there were probably dozens of first-time fund managers jumping into the impact investment space. Right now, we're at hundreds of fund managers in the impact investing space. And I think it's important to note the maturity in the space itself is that a lot of these fund managers are actually second, third, and fourth time fund managers within impact investing. And so that is an important kind of data point to talk about how we are moving as an asset class. In terms of sectors, in 2009, really people were doing microfinance and inclusive finance. Now we have impact investment fund managers focused on food, health, ag, workforce, racial equity, et cetera. So, the diversification and at the same time specialization of fund managers is something interesting to note as well. Similarly, from a product perspective, we were mainly at debt and equity. Now we are revenue-based financing, which I know we want to talk about later. We're still doing obviously debt and equity, but now we have we've listed a couple new SPACs. I don't know, special purpose acquisition companies, right? Like, I mean that 10 years ago we didn't really think about that. Let's be honest, as an impact investment tool. And so, long story short, I mean, I think you can just see how we've evolved over the past 10 years. To Rusty's point, we would like to get to a place where every investment takes into consideration the impact that they're having, the social impact. We're not quite there yet. We're a long way from there. But as an industry and as a movement, we've certainly moved into what I would call mainstream. I figured this out just as a kind of a side note. When my mom called me and she said, I'm watching the show Billions. They mentioned social impact investing. Is that what you do? And obviously, my first reaction was, "What the hell?" Sorry, I shouldn't say that. But what are you talking about? Like, what is Billions? And yes, I think that is what I do. But
it's nice that a television show
there,
helped you get there. You go. It's good. So I guess she doesn't listen to the phone calls you've been having and the check-ins and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. It's good. It's so Yigal, thanks. I mean, helpful context, and again, encourage the rest of the group to chime in on different aspects of it. I do have a follow-up. As the world has changed, as you said, really dramatically, and part of that is I'm trying to figure out, candidly, good or bad, but new entrants that are entering the market as impact investors. Almost on a weekly basis, there's new impact funds, accelerator impact funds. You have some of the largest, funds and fund brands like a KKR and a Bain that are establishing impact funds that are making huge swings with meaningful capital behind that. I'm curious your thoughts on that, and are we believing in the hype? Is that part of a hype? Is that something that structurally excites you and excites everyone else on the panel of more capital and more leadership capital that has had a brand reputation around it, or candidly, is it potentially dilutive or destabilizing to the movement that you guys have been part of?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously another big question, and I'm not sure we'll fully solve it on this panel, but welcome other people's thoughts. I mean, I do think there have been some recent entrants into the market that raise maybe eyebrows in some senses, but at the same time we welcome folks with large amounts of capital into this space, because we understand that the social issues we're trying to solve require large sums of capital. And so we can't really have one or the other. We need both. But it is a concern, certainly. And so what I would say to add on that and to kind of really think through that, and sometimes we measure the success of the impact investing industry by the amount of dollars flowing to the industry itself, right? We talk about $720 billion. We talk about a new $1 billion fund. But, as practitioners in this space, capital is really a tool that we use to get to the impact that we hope to achieve. So instead of measuring success by, the amount of dollars that are flowing into the space, we really should be measuring success by the impact we're having. And I think there's still a question around how deep is that impact and how meaningful is that impact? And I think that is a more interesting question in some ways. And so that's how I would answer it. It's not certainly a right or wrong answer, but I think it's an interesting conversation, and welcome others obviously to jump in.
And I can jump in a little, Rusty, if you don't mind. And I think, Yigal, you brought it up earlier just around the semantics of impact investing, like your mom trying to figure out what you do. I think often a lot of us in the industry are trying to figure out what does that mean. And I think you just hit it on the head, is what impact are we changing? And not to get lost in the data, right? But I think the data tells a story about the impact that we can have on markets, on people, on companies. And from my viewpoint, I think a lot of it focuses on where your perspective is. My viewpoint is, I entered the market looking at the 1% of Black women that weren't getting funded, the 10%, or the 1% of Black women that got funded, the 10% of women getting funded from a venture capital perspective, and trying to actually change those numbers. So when you look at impact, you can look at it from the social determinant, you can look at it from sheer movement of the needle, right? Movement of the number. And I just want to make that point as we start to discuss.
Kristina, just while you're kind of talking about that context, talk a little bit more about your work with Marathon Fund and Black Girls Ventures. I think it's an important conversation on a lot of fronts, especially in the context of what we're seeing in a post-COVID world, but I think it's helpful for everyone to recognize the work you're doing of changing truly the face and dynamics of sources of capital, and then entrepreneurs that are receiving that capital to drive innovation to solve some of the most critical problems in our country.
Absolutely. And I think to answer that, I want to give you a little context of my journey into investing in general. I think entrant into the space. I spent 20 years management consulting focused on software development and cyber for enterprise, DoD, and commercial clients. 2016, I ended up leaving my corporate career to start my own IT consulting business. And at the same time, this was literally October 31st, 2016, so a week before the election results, almost 4 years ago, right? That following week, I was at a Women in Tech conference, and there was a venture capital panel, and the woman, Natalia, who runs Pipeline Angels, was speaking on this panel. She was one voice of color, and the rest of the individuals were white. And I was listening to her. One, she was dynamic, and two, she came up with a call to action for any woman of color, any non-binary person who is an angel investor to get into angel investment. So I joined Pipeline Angels, learned a lot just about the inequities, and also invested in my first 3 companies through Pipeline. I started getting involved with the DC, Virginia, Maryland ecosystem, and that number that we talk about, that 1% that gets funding and the 99% that didn't, I was supporting the 99% and seeing their challenges and their struggle. Women who were working and still trying to start their company, women who are single parents that were trying to start their company. And so I'm a person of action. And so Yigal, you mentioned the gateway drug. My gateway drug is removing barriers for people. And so I only knew how to jump in. I didn't know what impact investment really meant, what measurements meant. What I knew is, how do I get funding to this person who has an idea and a scalable business? And so that's when I joined Black Girl Ventures as the board chair. Shelley Bell, who's the executive director, is doing amazing work of providing social capital and financial capital to Black and brown female founders. And it was actually through sitting on panels through Black Girl Ventures that I met Dwayne McKnight and Vernon Lee, who are partners with the Marathon Fund. And they convinced me to join them on this endeavor. We are focused on pre-seed funds, or we are a pre-seed fund focused on technology companies that are in the ed tech, health tech, financial tech, and government technology sectors that are started by underrepresented entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Kristina. Super helpful context and different perspective. I want to call out, Yigal, Kristina and I were actually looking at and sharing an article that I just want to share with the group, because I really would encourage folks to check it out. Very much following the work that Kristina is leading on a national level. But Forbes today had an interesting article that highlights new research from Black Women Talk Tech. It's an association of Black women tech founders. And there's some really interesting data points. First of all, around 42%, a lot of this was new to me. I thought it was amazing. 42% of net new women-owned businesses in the United States are from Black women as entrepreneurs, Black women founders. Over 35% of Black women founders of tech companies are focused in high-growth sectors, education, health, financial services, making up a market size of roughly $5 trillion. So at the core of incredibly huge verticals and sectors that are driving change in this economy, in this country. And this is not shocking, but it was just good to see it in print. Sometimes we just need to see it. From the same study, between 2009 and 2018, tech startups led by Black women raised $289 million to launch or sustain those businesses. $289 million over that 9-year period of time. That represents, we did not have slides. I made my own slide a half hour ago. So that represents 0.06%. So 0.06% of the $425 billion in total tech venture. And so if that doesn't provide some really powerful data and context for the work that Kristina has been leading, and the work that, frankly, everyone here on this panel is involved in some direct or indirect way, it really speaks to the massive imbalances that I think we know. But when you see some hard numbers, and then you see the need for innovation on the investment side, that's when this all comes together. And this is kind of what we're all about, is trying to figure out how we change that data, how we change those numbers, and how we make that systemic effort. So Jesse, no pressure, but why not? A lead in, you are one of the leaders in, a larger impact investor. ECMC Foundation, for folks that don't, know, is one of the leaders in looking at impact investing in different ways, but really focusing a great deal on ed tech, work in post-secondary. I think we were talking, I saw that I think in the last 5 years alone, the foundation has given around $160 million in grants and programs, and investments to over 1,200 grants that were impacting over 150 new programs. So really sizable. And one of the things that Jessie and I were talking about is the work that she does and leads, and the opportunity right now because of COVID to kind of double down on the way that you've approached that work in the past. Or an opportunity for a new approach and new innovations on how you guys look at opportunities and how you're looking to find and drive impact money and capital to the right entrepreneurs. And I was super interested in what you guys are doing and how you're approaching it. So you have the mic. I'd love for folks to better understand it.
Thanks, Rusty. I have to just respond quickly to your point about the flow of capital, and to be honest, the lack of democratization of capital that we currently have. One of the things that we've been really focused on is investing early, to Kristina's point, pre-seed or seed, because that's where we see the greatest discrepancies exist and the greatest disparities grow from there. And so to really close that gap in funding, we really do strongly believe that you have to start really early in investing in underrepresented founders and women founders and BIPOC founders. And you'll see those gains. You'll see that gap close later down the line in subsequent funding rounds. But to your point, when we think about this ecosystem of impact investors, we talked a lot about fund managers, and we talked about even some of the later stage entrants in the space. But there's been a very old tool that's been around for a really long time called program-related investments that foundations can use to make impact investments with. And now mission-related investments, so actually using part of the endowment to make impact investments. And it's been a really effective tool as well. I wish more foundations actually would take advantage of the opportunity to use this tool. At ECMC Foundation, which is a national post-secondary funder, we have a program called Education Innovation Ventures, which makes program-related investments in early-stage companies or nonprofit organizations with earned revenue streams that are really working to increase post-secondary educational outcomes as well as economic mobility for underserved learners. So we're really trying to seed and help grow new ideas, pilot innovations that can really make a difference in the lives of underserved students and job seekers, with our end goal being that we really want to see more individuals on a path toward a family sustaining wage. One of the ways that we do that is that we play sort of an alternative role in the venture capital ecosystem. Our investments are really meant to be very founder friendly. So we believe in providing flexible capital. It's generally below market rate. It's patient. And it's generally first loss and risk capital, meaning that we will take the risk and assume the risk in de-risking an early stage company, so that entrepreneurs like the ones that you've mentioned and Kristina has talked about really do have the ability to attract growth capital later down the line from other investors. Our goal is to really help ventures not only grow from a business perspective, but also widen their social impact. And I think what sets us apart as a foundation is that we get to make investments that produce concessionary returns, so that when companies are growing their business and their impact together, which we call shared value, that's a win-win, but that we can really prioritize first and foremost the end beneficiaries or end users that a venture is seeking to target. So in our case, learners and job seekers who are on a pathway that we can help help encourage in terms of persistence for students, completion, wage gains for job seekers. But we also do apply a gender and equity lens to our work. And now more than ever, we feel that this is incredibly important given the civil unrest in society, the historical injustices, the pandemic widening a lot of these racial disparities, as well as the education system and the move to online education and instruction further exacerbating these disparities, especially among our students of color. And so when we think about who we're ultimately hoping to impact, we are looking at students who come from underrepresented backgrounds, but also making sure that the founders are representative of those backgrounds as well, and really trying to widen and increase the capital pool for underrepresented founders.
I'm on mute. I'll get off. I'd love to just stay with that for a second. Just, COVID happens 8+ months ago. You as a team and leadership within the ecosystem have had this kind of moment, as we were talking about, kind of this opportunity to rise. And I'm just curious just how you guys as a team thought through that and had to think about it in the context of innovation. There's just moving, you talked about this a little bit before, Jesse, just moving capital in more flexible, maybe faster ways. Thinking about that, I'm just curious, maybe directionally that was where you guys were going, but it did have a moment in time where you guys had to change course, and you did decide to look at innovative ways to move capital faster to different folks. And I'm just curious, if you don't mind pulling back the curtain a little bit, also like a little bit of the process that you guys went through and how you had to mobilize as a team and as a foundation.
Yeah, this is such a pertinent question. Thank you, Rusty. I mean, you're right. And from our grant side of the house, we have put out rapid response grants. We've really doubled down on our grantee community. We've put out racial equity grants. So we've made a whole new we have a whole new docket of grants that we have made in response to the pandemic, which may have started 8 months ago, but is still very real and present today. We will continue that work in terms of being really responsive to the grantee and investee communities. But that being said, we also have we've thought, how do we really provide the supports and sort of the technical assistance and honestly just the compassion needed right now for our current partners in this work, but then also how do we think about the currently unemployed workforce? We know that in April of this year, unemployment was at an all-time high at 15%. That claimed over 40 million jobs. So we've really had to position a little bit without changing strategy completely. We've had to think about this unprecedented crisis that's at the intersection of post-secondary education and the future of work. And we've listened to a lot of sort of the data out there and the polls that suggest that most of the unemployed workforce is going to turn to training and education in order to upskill and prepare for the future of work. And so we've started looking at evaluating different short-term training programs and considering what is affordable and what does affordability look like for individuals in those across kind of that training landscape. Especially we're looking at programs that can lead to gainful employment and family sustaining wages, which is really kind of our North Star. And one of the things that we've both invested in the past and will likely continue to invest in going forward are income share agreements. We think that they have a real ability to spread risk across stakeholders, including students, funders, and investors, as well as the institution themselves that are providing instruction, and that they can help drive equity for students. And so we're really looking now at how do we use income share agreements, or how do we help support income share agreements to increase outcomes in short-term training programs that are focused specifically on unemployed individuals as a result of this ongoing pandemic.
Interesting. Yigal, I'm just curious, just as also someone that is, manages a fund with CEOs and entrepreneurs in a portfolio, just in a similar vein, in hearing Jesse talk about how they responded and thinking about innovations that they needed to do as a team, and also how that translated into funding strategies and products. Just curious how you and Joanne at ETF also looked at that and, saw that obviously as a challenge and or an opportunity.
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I wish we had more time to kind of dive in as well. But, the Employment Technology Fund was designed to invest in employment technologies that support the needs of low-wage earners, frontline workers. And as kind of Jesse pointed out, these are the communities that were hit and devastated the most by COVID. And so, there were two kind of reactions from us in almost two phases, I would say, of kind of where capital is flowing as a response to COVID and how we treated our portfolio companies aligns with that. One is, kind of the phase one was a health crisis. I think as a nation, as individuals, we were kind of in shock. And so you saw a lot of capital from philanthropy, fund managers, government flow to, health, shelter, food, et cetera. And so similarly with our portfolio companies, we kind of we hit the brakes. We said, okay, this is like, a major, a major moment and major crisis. And so we have a portfolio of debt and equity investments. With the debt investments, we paused all interest payments to ETF. I think we were actually the first fund to go to market publicly and say, this is not the time to be paying us any sort of interest payments or principal payments. Let's pause that for 2 quarters. Let's make sure you as a company are doing well. Let's make sure you're still having impact on the end beneficiaries that we care about most. And let's make sure that you can take care of your team. We don't want you to be letting go of any team people at this time because you need to pay us back as impact investors. That kind of doesn't make sense, right? So that's what we did immediately. And then, kind of phase two, Jesse spoke about this as well, is really kind of the workforce issue. I think the employment and workforce, getting people back to work, getting them the skills they need, because, as we move away from kind of this initial shock, now we move into recovery. And the recovery should be an equitable recovery and should be, really focused on making people's lives better on the back end and kind of than where they were originally. And so similarly with our portfolio companies, we've been working with them to kind of in some ways pivot their model, in other ways to double down their efforts, but to really align with them closely to have the type of scale and urgency that we need to meet the moment. And I think, we're going to kind of loop Carrie into this bit, but that's a perfect segue to really what she's been able to do, both as a company, but what they're, gearing up to do going forward.
Thanks.
So,
yeah.
I don't know if you want to tee that up.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, thanks. Carrie's been remarkably patient. I did not meet Carrie before the last week or two. She's been one of my favorite people to email with. She puts a smile on my face every time she sends an email. So I just want to thank you in front of our 60 closest friends that are participating in this. She also happens to be an amazing CEO, an entrepreneur and founder that has launched a very disruptive, innovative company that I'll have Carrie talk about called Embodied Labs. So I'd love for you to do that first. You have a pretty also, I think, powerful personal story on your experience and how that led you to become an entrepreneur and trying to solve a problem. And then I'd love the opportunity, if you're cool with it, to just share that with folks, because I think it's meaningful around alignment, around passion, personal experiences, and then the grit to actually launch something that's so special. So one, please do that and talk about the company, and then I'd love to obviously lead into kind of what you do and the problem you solve, but just also the relationship to the funding that you went after and the process on that.
Sure. Yeah, I will tackle all of those things. And if I forget something, then I'm sure you'll nudge me on it. So hi, everybody out there. I wish I could see your faces. I'm kind of trying to imagine the 62 of you out there listening in. It's great to get to share my story with you. I founded a company called Embodied Labs just over 4 years ago now. Today I'm 32, just to walk through a timeline. So founded it at 28. actually founded it the same month that my mom passed away. She was 61. And for the 12 years leading up to that, when I was 19, she was in her 40s. She was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. And so as a person navigating my own career, you know, I've been in global public health. That was my college training. I was a Peace Corps volunteer for a couple of years. And then I became my mom's primary caregiver in my mid-20s. And I came home to take care of my mom. I have sisters. We kind of did what's common in families, is pass the baton between family members for helping support as a care team. And I came in when my mom started in her later stages of having early onset Alzheimer's disease. And so I always wanted, even before she was in her later stages, I struggled to connect her diagnosis and her lived experience with, my understanding of her as her daughter, her care partner. And so one prop I always like to share that's kind of the seed for Embodied Labs was that my mom had a left visual field deficit. And so I realized as I started hiring home health aides to help support my dad and I in her care, care of activities of daily living, I would try to explain what that meant in words. But if we all just put on this pair of goggles that literally just has the left sides taped off, we could immediately step into my mom's perspective, and we could intuit why it was that if we approach her from the left, we're going to scare the crap out of her. If we don't watch the left side of her body when she's walking, she'll run into the doorway or might fall down. And then at mealtime, she would eat exactly half of her plate of food, which, seems very strange, but not when you put on these goggles and you say, oh, I've got to rotate it so she can finish her meal. And so this concept of stepping into her lived experience empowered us because we went from a sympathy to empathy of sharing a perspective with her. And that also transformed our ability to provide effective care for her very quickly. And then we also learned more about what a left visual field deficit is just by putting on goggles rather than having to use a lot of words, complicated ones. And so that prompted this question for me that ultimately became Embodied Labs today of how much more could we do as care providers and even just service providers if we can share experiences together and step into the lived experiences, the conditions of others in order to unbox the what we don't know, we don't know. And so at Embodied Labs, we have an immersive platform that puts you inside of scenarios in a headset like this into a VR scenario where you're able to use your voice and gesture, and you're truly controlling agency as you're able to look through the perspectives of people that are a different age or race or gender or in a different stage of their life or a different culture than your own. And we've tackled this to start in the aging services sector. So we're a post-seed funded company. We've closed our first round of equity financing in January of this past year, and have a diverse group of investors, a couple of impact investors, a couple that are strategic in digital health and aging services and immersive technology. And we've been able to bring this B2B SaaS model immersive training platform to about 150 organizations. They're all, as I said, in aging services, whether that's a government adult protective services agency that's training social workers, or even bringing this to the community as a part of a family caregiver support education program. We have a call center as one of our customers. We were actually just in the New York Times in August, where Great Call, which is part of Best Buy Health, shared how embodying the people that they're that's on the other end of the phone for them actually gives their call center employees greater confidence in their ability to serve those customers, more knowledge of what their customers are going through, tying their customers' experience to one of their own loved ones, whether it's their grandma or someone that they know that's living through experiences that impact us as we age. And some of the other ways we've looked at impact with these customer groups, again, in senior living, home care, hospice, or a few of the others that represent that 150, is that we do measure impact in terms of behavior change, perspective taking, all things that kind of add up to how do we quantify empathy. And I think if there's anything that's come out of this COVID year, is that it's easier now for me than ever before to say empathy and shared experiences are a need to have. And to be able to provide empathy as a service through software, to use technology as a way to share human experiences, as a way to close a divide that I think in some ways technology we've seen it increase. So I look at Embodied Labs as a company that's really delivering shared human experiences to heal and connect and make businesses more effective and more efficient at scale.
Thanks, Carrie. You blow me away every time you tell your story and how you've been able to channel that into something that's truly innovative. So thank you super much. And by the way, you just officially, the bumper sticker of quantifying empathy, is a good kind of closer for us and for people as their takeaway, because I think it's a really special time for us to think about that. I'm actually going to ask, Carrie, if you don't mind, I'm going to take some of your more inspirational and aspirational vision on who you are and what you've done, and ask a little bit of a less interesting question, but one that I think is really helpful for a lot of the entrepreneurs that are on the call in the session, which is just like the mechanics. I've raised a lot of money as an entrepreneur, as a co-founder, and the grit and the hustle and the pain associated with it. I told the story that I went out to Silicon Valley to raise money and got rejected by 10 funds in 1 week, in 1 3-day period of time, came home to Washington, D.C., could not have been more down, and was greeted by my 5-year-old child who all I wanted was a hug in life. And I opened my arms for a hug and he went straight to my wife and his mother instead. And I just basically broke down in tears, and it's a hard thing. But it's especially hard, as we've talked about before, being a woman, being other kind of minority groups, especially we've talked a little bit about immigrants that are starting off and trying to do this. And so I'm just curious, the mechanics of finding the capital and finding impact investors and social capital resources, and how did that first check come in, and how did you find a lead investor? Because oftentimes people don't talk about the nuts and bolts of what that's like and how hard that is. And I'd appreciate if you share some of that journey.
Yeah. Let's see, I'm not on mute. Great. So I had a chance in preparation for this panel to talk with Kristina a little bit, and she's asking me about my journey, and it provided a really great space for me to reflect on some of those things. And I think, Rusty, it is, as someone who's been on the side of the table before raising capital, it's incredibly mysterious to figure out how to get through this process, from first checks from angel investors, pre-seed capital, to certainly your lead investor for an equity financing round. And what I think comes first, that leads before any capital, is working through a social network. So really trying to reach out to people, not the ones who are writing the checks, but the people who are passionate about the space that you're building your business in, and to cast a web, and to know that when you're at a conference, when you're here as one of the 63 participants networking to say, hey, let me reach out and email you, or Jesse, how do I get a hold of you? I mean, that's where, years later, you may see the fruits of that as your network that is your capital network. So when we started in 2016, we were a team of first-time founders, and we got into an accelerator program. It's called Creative Startups. It was new at the time, and we wound up winning that accelerator, and we got our first check for the company, which was a no interest loan of $25,000 that we had to pay back within, I negotiated the terms up to 2 years instead of 1. And we were able to do that. And then from that network, we found our first angel investor who was an advisor for that program. And she wrote a first check of pre-seed capital of $25,000 and saw our incremental progress, wrote a second check of $25,000. We also met with what would become one of our first paying customers, a senior services organization in Chicago. And their CEO said, "Can we invest in your company?" It wasn't even something that we were necessarily looking for that I thought of, but they, as a nonprofit and fairly forward thinking in where they take bets, they said, "We want to be one of the first ones in for Embodied Labs because we understand how this product and this team's vision can impact our business." And then attending conferences in the sectors we were in, so longevity, we have a conference that we attended called the Boomer Summit, and became very close to the founder of that, Mary Furlong, and we were able to basically cold call angel investors that were on panels there. And like you, Rusty, I've been rejected now hundreds of times. When I went out to raise our seed, there were I think from about 60 live pitches, we got down to about 4 yeses in addition to our lead, and of that there were over 100 just emails trying to form that social capital to say, here's what I'm doing. Do we have a aligned philosophy? And I say that philosophy because your investors are never your check. It's like you're trying to align your mission, vision, and values, and you really have to find ways to relationship build over time, because there's almost like this misnomer, at least I had this idea when I started out, that you just walk in an office and you pitch and you walk out with the check and you're done. And it's a much longer process than that. And I think any headline you see of a raise completed is really a headline that happens in a single day, but probably represents months, if not years of relationship building.
So just thanks, Carrie. Again, just like an amazing journey. So I appreciate you sharing it with all of us. I'm just curious, from either Kristina, Yigal, or Jesse, one of the things that's been a theme that we talked about this week is that talent is everywhere, but that's not necessarily true that the opportunity is everywhere. And Kristina talked a lot about that in the context of access to capital. And one of the things that we haven't talked so much of is what does right capital mean even, right? Like, what does that even look like? And so when you hear that from Carrie, I'd love for any reaction from anyone on similar stories, or just like how you guys candidly can be better at that. That you have access to capital, you are part of an ecosystem of capital, and what do you guys need to do better, and what is your expectation of other stakeholders or collaborators to help you out to create more bridges and more access of all these things? I think we're in this amazing time where there's a lot of opportunity for that. That doesn't necessarily mean that we've successfully kind of translated that into transformative change. So just opening up to the group of any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll start with that because I really enjoyed learning Carrie's journey. And the question I asked was, what happened before the 3.2 million? And part of the reason is in the capital stack that I support, and the Marathon Fund and Black Girl Ventures supports, is that friends and family plus. And typically, when we talk COVID, 41% of Black companies are already closing their doors because of the COVID hit and the subsequent racial unrest. And part of that is they didn't have enough runway. They didn't have enough money in the bank, and they had to close their doors. And so one of the things that we do, and Carrie mentioned this, one of the things when we were talking, she mentioned, I don't think she just mentioned that, but using pitch competitions or non-dilutive capital opportunities to start and fund your business, and then moving that into finding your lead investor. And I reflected with Carrie last night just to say, I'm working with a lot of individuals, a lot of companies that are struggling to find that lead investor. And one of the things that I believe is an action that impact investors can do better of is making sure that companies and entrepreneurs understand their mission alignment and meeting them earlier in the process, helping them to, start and build the relationships that Carrie talked about. Social capital is so critical and key, building that so they can move up the stack. And so I think it's incumbent on all of impact investors across the stack to build that conveyor belt, so to speak, of moving from the seed, the idea stage, all the way, hopefully, to exit. I think that's really important. With Black Pearl Ventures, just on the pitch competition side, one of the things that Shelley Bell, again, the executive director, thought through was creating these pitch competitions as a friends and family round for the startup companies. And so she provides $1,000 to the first $100,000 donation, non-dilutive, for people who are going through that process. And so it's really key getting people started, growing, and then hopefully scaling up to that next level.
Yeah, Kristina, I just completely agree with what you said. We have also started a pitch competition program specifically for women-led ventures that are focused in post-secondary education and future of work with a VC firm and partner of ours, Chloe Capital, in order to do just what you said. Our funding is not necessarily non-dilutive, but the idea is to really crowdsource additional investors that may not necessarily be looking at some of these companies at such an early stage to really help expand both physical capital as well as social capital, to your point. And Carrie, I completely agree. I mean, I think that when it comes to capitalizing your business, you're really kind of entering a form of a marriage with an investor. And so it is long-term. And I think that being discerning and thoughtful and making sure that it's really mission-aligned capital is incredibly important from both sides. I have to say, though, from an impact investing perspective, Yigal and I were just speaking about this too. I think one of the things that we can definitely do better is shorten the time to deployment, or shorten the time as well as time to decision making, because oftentimes as a really busy entrepreneur, you don't really have the time or the energy to sort of be kind of waiting indefinitely to find out if you're getting funding or not. And I think we can also do a much better job working together on our due diligence process. And I think we really need to be sharing due diligence better. I think we need to be coming to terms around measurement, and coming up with a set standard or metrics that we will, that we ask of entrepreneurs to collect and report on, so that you don't have to report on 10 different sets of metrics for each funder or investor. So I think that there's a lot that we can do to really alleviate some of the burden on the entrepreneur. And I've been feeling good about the industry in terms of a lot of people are starting to talk about this in terms of wanting to work better together and collaborate more. And I think we'll get there, but we certainly still have a bit of a ways to go.
Carrie, you had an interesting thought. We just were chatting, and I have a very similar experience that you were going to go. So I'd love your perspective on just piggybacking on Kristina and Jesse.
Yeah, I did a lot of pitch competitions. As I said, we got our first check in January of 2020, and we founded in August of 2016. And in between that time, we won about $400,000 in pitch competition capital. I think, you don't see pitch competitions for men for a reason, and pitch competitions coming from someone who applied for way more than I won or got accepted into. I mean, they take so much time. You don't know if you're going to win. And I think there are tons of businesses coming from I like to call them underestimated founders rather than underestimated founders that don't get their businesses funded because they can't get the bigger checks. And so more than anything, I'd love to see if there are competitions that the checks can fill that lead investment size, or that the capital is meaningful enough that it's not putting the founders at risk to even be trying to get their venture off the ground.
I think it's such a huge point, Carrie. I'm glad you raised it. I've been on both sides of that, and it can be an extremely inefficient, exhausting experience. So thanks for it's an important point in this. I want to open it up to the group. There's some questions that have come in from folks that are on the call, so I want to make sure we bring them in. There's a question from John, who is the CEO of Whole Story. And he asked an interesting question of just anyone that has experience on the panel and advice around more of a hybrid enterprise model that has a component that's nonprofit and for-profit in driving impact, and kind of beyond the governance issues of that that need to be figured out. Just curious if anyone has a view of any experiences around navigating funding for more hybrid models.
And I'll start. I'm wondering if that question is around fundraising for a company, and so I'll just kind of actually give a little color around, working with Black Girl Ventures and also working and raising money for the Marathon Fund together. Black Girl Ventures is a 501(c)(3). When we talk about corporate funding or institutional funding or investment, there are opportunities for them to move money quicker sometimes, depending on the type of company that you do have. I think, one of the things I would kind of throw back to John, and happy to talk offline a bit more, is it product? Is it service? Who is it serving? Is it regional, national? And kind of look at what that ecosystem and funding opportunities look like. I don't think there's a one bullet for any model. I think, but I think, Jessica, you brought it up earlier, is we have creative models out there. You all mentioned SPACs. I think, Jessica, you mentioned income sharing, depending on what you're doing. And I think it's incumbent for entrepreneurs and businesses and companies to think about what makes the most sense for your product, your service, your industry, and how that fits into your funding ecosystem.
Yeah, just kind of back to some of the takeaway headlines and themes around alignment, mission alignment, kind of passion alignment, this idea of navigating and having patience around a structure of an impact organization, for-profit or nonprofit, and having a lot of transparency and clarity on what that is. I know that in my experiences, both as an investor, but also on the entrepreneurial side, there's nothing more awkward and uncomfortable than realizing later in the game that you may not be mission aligned with your investors. And that can be, candidly, it can be actually a really frightening moment when you are working, 28 hours a day on building something and growing and scaling something and realize that alignment may be off. And so even in the context of hybrid that John was mentioning, I think that Kristina's point and elements of around alignment around capital is really critical. So we have 3 minutes, and I know that they are super hardcore about cutting us off. So I want to give you guys the opportunity in a little bit of a speed round. The headline of this was kind of investment in crisis, in a time of crisis. And so I'm curious where, if I can, like, let's all become prophets a little bit, and let's look at what, the next 3 to 5 years ahead of us. I'm just curious of what you guys think and may predict that could be ahead of us because of the moment we're in. If we are going to rise above this, if we are going to take action. And if we are born at the right time, what do you think that means 5 years from now, let's say, because of the actions that all of you and others have taken? I'm just curious what that prediction may be. It could be on the entrepreneurial side. It could be on the investing side or on the vehicle model, but would love your take. And we have 2 minutes. So I think each of you have roughly, 45 seconds.
I mean, I'll jump in. From the fund manager investor side, I mean, I think Jesse brought up a great point around, having a more collaborative approach. And so 5 years from now, I'd love to, work with other investors, foundations, different sources of capital into more of perhaps a blended model, more cooperative model, with the North Star, which is to have impact. And so hopefully maybe 5 years from now, when I go in pitching the fund, so, we're all pitching something at the end of the day. I'm pitching the fund often to investors. Their first question is often, what's the financial return look like? And so, can we change that and change the narrative to focus more on impact as a measure of success? And I think that would be a nice 5 years from now forward.
And I'm keeping it moving. Jesse, thoughts?
Yep, I agree. I think also right now is actually the time for us to turn an eye toward diversity and inclusion. There's been a lot of criticism of the VC industry and around diversity, and rightly so. But I don't think as impact investors we can wait for that to change. I think that we actually have to have the responsibility to step up and step in and provide that risk capital, invest early, especially in companies led by BIPOC founders as well as women founders, because we know that by most accounts they received 1% to 2% of funding respectively from VC. And so we really do have an obligation there to really think about how we can fill in those funding gaps and how we can invest early so that those gaps close later on. And I loved what you said, Carrie, about investing in just the game-changing ideas. As impact investors, I think we just really have a responsibility to help seed those really incredible ideas from underestimated founders.
Thanks, Carrie. I'm going to go to you, and then Kristina, you get the final word.
I think in 5 years, closing a gap for investments in this 2%. Women less than the 0.06% women of color that you showed, Rusty, on your slide. If we are truly seeding and accelerating those companies, the businesses that we don't know exist are going to exist and create incredible gains. And impact it returns financial value. I think we have to say, you invest in a business that drives impact, you're investing in a financially viable acceleration of our businesses and infrastructure. I think today we're seeing that those things have broken down, and we have to put impact into, in my opinion, every VC's thesis if they want to see returns on their portfolios.
Thanks, Kristina.
And I'll go quickly. So I'm hoping to see more angel investors of every demographic in the I'm trying to get all my thoughts in. More angel investors. The SEC has relaxed rules, so hopefully we'll see more angel investors of all demographics. The other thing I would say for everyone is just interrogate the process, no matter where you are in the stack. And if you're not seeing change in terms of statistics and numbers, do more. That is what I hope to see in the next 5 years.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the participants for staying with us. I just want to thank the panelists. You guys have been amazing, and you were amazing. And Kristina's final thought, I think, is a powerful one, which is let's all do more. So a great rest of the day and week, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks, everyone.